A very good afternoon to one and all. First of all, let me give a big congratulations and compliment to Team MOSCON 2021, especially the President Dr. Parikshit, Dr. Shirish Secretary, and the dynamic Chairperson Scientific Committee, Dr. Ragini, for putting up such a beautiful show. This is indeed takes a lot of effort and dedication to organize such things in a virtual platform. In physical, it means it's slightly difficult, or at times it's easier. So I really compliment the entire team of MOSCON for putting up such a good show. Let us begin with this pan-ophthalmology session. And the first speaker is a very dynamic Dr. Vivek Kothavde from Nasik, and he's going to tell us more about interpretation of Pentacam oculizer. So all over to you, Dr. Vivek.
Yeah, thank you, sir. First of all, I would like to thank the MOS Scientific Committee for giving me this chance to talk. I'm going to talk on interpretation of Pentacam or oculizer. So basically, why do we, what's the advantage of tomography? Because it gives us information about the anterior as well as the posterior surface of the cornea. The limitations of topography are like curvature is analogous to measuring a spectacle lens power, which though accurate tells you nothing about the shape of the lens, as multiple lenses or shapes can give you the same power, or a same lens can give you multiple powers. So the curvatures do have limitations. You tilt a placidus disc or you tilt the eye, the effect is same as you get in high angle kappa. So the need for elevation. So basically elevation is done by Scheimpflug photography with two cameras. One is centrally located, the one which rotates, captures images. This is one of those images. And these are things that you get on Pentacam. The settings that you use are the standard international settings to compare maps of other machines and same patient repeat exams. So this is the chord map that you get. First thing that you do is confirm the name of the patient, the date of the birth of the patient, the quality standard. If it is okay, then you go ahead and interpret. You get the K1, K2 for front as well as the back surface, the Q value, and the peripheral radius of curvature also. Then you get the Pachy at the pupil center, the apex, and the thinnest point on the cornea. And you also have to remember the different overlays that are used by the machine. This is the pupil margin, the dotted circle. The white diamond is the Kmax. The black circle is the thinnest point of the cornea. So you also need to know that. It gives you the x coordinate of the pupil center, which is more important for a reason that it is a distance between the center of the pupil and the apex of the cornea. So it roughly gives you the chord mu, or tells us about the angle kappa. If it is greater than 0.4, then it is significant. Then you look at the y coordinate of the thinnest point of the cornea. If it is inferiorly displaced by more than 0.6, 0.7 millimeters, it is significant and suggestive of ectasia. Then you also get corneal volume, and many studies have shown a reduction in corneal volume in ectatic disorders. You get a chamber of volume also. If it is less than 100, then you suspect angle closure glaucoma. You get AC depth from epithelium as well as endothelium. Then you get a colorimetric power deviation. If it is greater than 1.5, then it is supposed to be abnormal. You get the antechamber angle, you get the pupil diameter, you get the lens thickness also if you do a dilated examination. You get tangential map as well as sagittal maps. If the tangential maps are too noisy to interpret, so most of the times we use the sagittal maps. The patterns that you get on sagittal curvature maps are the symmetric or symmetric bow tie with or without skewed radial axis. The red flags for ectasia are these. Then you come to elevation maps. Now, how do we measure the elevation? What should be the reference surface, and which reference surface is the best? So when you measure the height of a mountain, you consider mean sea level as the reference level. So similarly, if you see the city of Mumbai, Nasik, and Mount Everest, you can easily make out that Mount Everest is tallest if you measure it in meters. The same thing if you measure in kilometers, this is what you get, and visually it is very difficult to interpret whether Nasik is at a greater height or Mount Everest is at a greater height. But there is nothing wrong in measuring it in kilometers. Similarly, different reference surfaces for cornea are available, like best fit sphere, best fit ellipse, or best fit toric ellipsoid. Now, the smaller the BFS, the steeper it is along, larger the BFS, flatter it is. The same cornea looks different if BFS changes. If you use large BFS, more corneas will appear ectatic, making it difficult to screen. A change in reference surface, though, doesn't affect the accuracy, sensitivity, or specificity. So all the reference surfaces are correct, but for easy understanding, 8mm BFS is or should be used most of the times for quick visual interpretation. So if you use a best fit sphere, this is what you get, and you can easily make out that this is a keratoconus. With a toric ellipsoid, you have a little doubt because it's yellow in color. So these are the elevation maps. This is normal. This is a case of keratoconus where you get a central elevation here. In high astigmatism, you get elevation, but it's at the periphery. So you need to ignore it. So these are different cutoffs used for anterior as well as the posterior elevation maps. Then you come to pachymetry maps where you get the dotted lines, the above and the bottom dotted line, it signifies the 95% confidence intervals. The patient data is shown in red line, which should fall within the two dotted lines above and below. So the gradual increase in corneal thickness from center towards periphery in healthy eyes falls within normal range, and this is used as an identifying criteria for ectasia. The corneal thickness spatial profile uses 22 concentric circles centered on thinnest point with 0.4 millimeter steps. And these are the graphs that you get. This is a normal patient. Whereas in keratoconus, you get a quick slope or a S shape here. If the dip is before 6 millimeters, it is significant. If it is after 6 millimeters, it's less important. Then we get pachymetric progression index. Normally, it should be less than 1.2. Then you get the Bellin-Ambrosio enhanced ectasia display. Like you get a standard elevation map, an exclusion map, and a difference map. Now, why is the need for the exclusion map? In case of keratoconus, as the height of the cone increases, the height of the BFS also increases, thereby decreasing the difference between the apex of the cone and the BFS. So if you exclude the central 3 to 4 millimeters area, the height of the BFS reduces, thereby increasing the distance between the height of the cone and the highest point of the BFS. So excluding the ectatic area would result in a new reference surface, which is flatter, and it would make it would catch the cone at a much earlier stage. That's why we need an enhanced BFS. So this is a standard elevation front map, and this is then we come to the D values for the front surface, back surface, pachymetric progression, the thickness, thinnest point displacement. The overall bad D, if it is more than 1.6, it is shown in yellow. If it is more than 2.6, it is shown in red. You can make an age adjustment for the bad D. Bad D is more sensitive to pachymetric progression than to back surface or thinnest point displacement. Like here, the pachymetric progression is in yellow and the bad D is in yellow. Here, the front surface is shown in red, but still the final bad D is in white. And here the front surface as well as the thinnest point is in yellow, but still the bad D, final bad D is in it's normal. Then you get Artmax or the Ambrosio relational thickness, which is the thinnest packet divided by progression index. Normally is less than 400. The final clinical decision to operate for your refractive surgery depends on not on the red or yellow of the machine, but on the complete family history, the age, the refraction, the ablation depth, the other eye, the inter-eye asymmetry, etc. Then you come to Holladay report, in which you get all these different maps. The only difference here is the Holladay report uses the best. It doesn't use a best fit sphere, but it uses a toric ellipsoid as a reference surface. Then you get the EKR values at 1 millimeter, 2 meters, up to 7 millimeters. Then you get all these different things like EKR, flat K, steep K, mean K, and the total aberrations of the eye. And these can be used, the EKR values can be used in IL power calculation. The EKR at 4.5 is more important because the study which Dr. Holladay did, they found that majority of the population undergoing cataract surgery had a mesopic pupil size of 4.5 millimeter. Then you have a Q value according to which you can decide which IOL you can implant. Then you get the back to front red eye ratio also. Normal is 82.2, and if it reduces after the myopic laser surgery. You also get the estimated pre-refractive K in the Holladay report, which can be used for IL calculation in double K method. You get this K readings where you get the semi-meridian lines, and you can use these maps to plan your toric IOLs. You get the EKR distribution also, where this is a normal patient, and in post-RK patient, you can see it's all over the place. You can just study how are the results of your refractive surgery. So these are things we already discussed this. You can use oculizer in ICL also in planning the ICL and post-operative calculation of your vault after the surgery. You can use oculizer in cataract surgery as we already seen. And people have used Pentacam in using corneal densitometry to use as a tool for amiodarone therapy, where they thought the corneal density increases. So it's a great tool with so much of information at our disposal, and it's up to use how to make use of it in our clinical practice. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Vivek. I know it was a lengthy discussion which can go on and on, but you have summed up in such a wonderful way. Thank you so much. May I ask Dr. Kenya to invite the next speaker?
Yeah. So the next speaker is going to speak on the effect of screen on child's eye and mind. I would invite Dr. Rutika Khadse to speak on this said topic.
Good afternoon, sir. First
Yeah,
of all,
good.
thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. So, is
Yeah.
the screen visible, sir?
I would, yeah, now it is visible. Now just share your screen.
Is it visible, sir?
Yeah,
Slides?
very much. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Myself, Dr. Rutika Khadse. I've been practicing as a consultant pediatric ophthalmology in Amravati, Maharashtra. My topic for today is effects of screen time on your child eyes and mind. As we know that we live in media-driven world where use of screen is indispensable part of our life. But what should be the impact, or what is the impact of screen on young brain, and how much screen time they should be exposed to? This is what we'll be going to discuss in the further presentation. So a quick review: effect on eye. We already know that generally the most common effect is evaporative dry eye, which results due to infrequent blinking. It results in grittiness sensation, foreign body sensation, burning, itching, increased glare in children. Astinopia is more common because of a constant near work for extensive period, maybe it for entertainment or maybe it is for schooling also. The eye is in constant state of accommodation and convergence, which due to which the fluidity of the visual motor system is fatigued, which leads to the accommodation and convergence dysfunctions. Generally, the patient or the child will come and complain to you that the patient is having blur vision, double vision, headache. Headache is the most common complaint. I think everyone will be seeing in OPD right now. Patient also complain of focusing difficulty. Sometimes the patient will have vision 6/6 and still he'll be complaining that I'm not able to read from the board or I'm not able to read from the book. So basically this is due to the accommodation dysfunction. Myopia progression is increasing and there is a much increased incidence of acute onset esotropias. Circadian rhythm disturbances is caused due to the blue light which is emitted from the devices. It secretes the melatonin from the melanocytes, which affects the human circadian rhythm and induces sleep disturbances. Here the child has difficulty to get asleep. So ocular side effects we knew before also, but nowadays American Academy of Pediatrics have more focus on what is this its effect on mind and development of a child. So basically, we'll come to one and one effect one by one. So initially, we'll discuss about the language development of a child. As we know, for language development, language is developed only and only when a child interacts with the family, interacts with the friends and the society. Because it only involves, it doesn't involve only the words, but it involves the words, facial expressions, the non-verbal clues, and the emotion input also. Babies don't learn anything from machine, but they just learn from human interaction. This is the basic thing. Many of the time we only forget as a parent, and we think that they are learning it from the screens by watching various shows. Physical health, definitely it is decremental due to the increased sedentary lifestyle of the baby or of a child. Sleep disturbances, here we have a very important part that during sleep disturbance, as we have discussed early, the main part of the sleep is deep REM part, which is very much important for a child because this is the time where all the processing of the memory takes place. So it directly affects the memory part. Whenever a child is not able to sleep or it doesn't take enough or adequate sleep due to the exposure to the blue light, basically they are having no or very less amount of REM sleep, which will interfere in the memory processing. For example, if a child is awake in algebra class also, but he will not be able to remember what has happened in the yesterday's class. Because for every day, this whatever happens with us is stored in the memory in frontal cortex in this REM sleep only. So decreasing this severely affect the development of a child. Other most common and most worrisome are the emotional and behavioral problems. So basically screen will decrease the emotional input, the screen will decrease the control of emotions. Normally, what is a common reason for giving screen to the children is so that the child is not bored. But this boredom is very necessary because this is the time which will teach the child how to manage themselves, how to control their impulses, and this is the time which the child will develop imagination process. So everything will be disrupted if continuous stimulation by screen is given. This leads to loss of control of impulses and leads to frustration, impulsive behavior in children, which is very common nowadays. So screen basically also induces what is called as pleasant reward cycle. This is the same effect as we get from any drugs or anything, because they will increase the impulse. Screen also induces the impulse and produces dopamine, which is a happy hormone for the brain. This is inversely proportional. Its effect is inversely proportional for the age. So younger the child, more dopamine secretion will take place and more is the chances that the child will become addict to screen further onward. And after some time, it is really very difficult to take off screen from his or her life. Other factors which is very important is a child for proper development of a child, concentration and focus is very much necessary. But due to the constant media use or due to of games are used and the brain is then trained for the only high frequencies. Brain now doesn't respond to all the low frequency things, and then this children becomes attention deficit. They develop attention deficit disorders in future, which incidence is increasing very drastically. And other effects which we know is musculoskeletal problems. This is also ignored, but yes, many patients will come with neck pain, back pain from the age of 3 itself. Treatment is multi-directional. For dry eye, the known treatment is lubricating eye drops, wearing glasses, and most important and most effective is the 20-20-20 rule. That is, every 20 minutes, take a break of 20 seconds and look at an object which is 20 feet away. Asthenopia, for asthenopia, vision therapy is the effective therapy. Various vision therapy are available. It can be like lens flippers and heart chart, which are used for accommodation dysfunction, to treat accommodation dysfunction. Brock string and lifesaver cards are used for treating the convergence insufficiencies. These are very effective. Nowadays, we commonly use them. Position of a laptop or computer should be good. Outdoor activity promote the natural movement of the eye and hand-eye coordination. It increases the depth perception, eye tracking, and it promote the overall development of a visual system. So it is recommended that at least 2 hours of play outside is necessary for each and every child for proper visual development. Prevention is always better than cure. So these are the few tips which will help us to decrease the screen time in child. It is not very easy, but we have to do this because it has many major effects which we have not discussed or which we have not known before. So first and foremost important is be a role model. It is very difficult to tell the child that you don't use screen, you don't see TV or whatever if we are using the same. If we come and every time we watch TV or we are online binging with the online series, then it is very difficult that the child will listen to us. So first of all, we have to change, we have to decrease the use. Nowadays, there is more focus on quality of a media and not the quantity time. The quantity of time is not that very important, but the quality of the media, what the child is seeing, is very much important. The best thing is to co-watch with the child. This is the only thing which is very useful. It has many benefits because while you co-watch with the child, you can make them understand what they are seeing, what is right, what is wrong, how to differentiate it. And if any good activity is there or any good thing is there, they can apply it in the real life itself. Let them earn it. Don't, a child thinks that looking at a laptop, looking at an iPad or looking at a mobile is their right, but it is not their right. It is supposed to be privileged for them. So they have to earn for it. So you have to decide some rules that only after homework or only after having good dinner, they can watch whatever favorite shows they have. Explain why you're limiting the screen time. You can just not say to this generation that don't do this, don't do that. You have to explain them the limitations, the downfalls of the screen time. Encourage the other activities, encourage them with the other sports. Create technology free zones, for example, kitchen and dining area where this is not allowed, where the mobile and laptops are not allowed at all. And teaching the appropriate behavior. Nowadays, internet has become a integral part of education system itself. So during the use of the internet, a child is uh, exposed to many other things which is not supposed to be. So it is better that a parent teaches them beforehand what to do and what to not. So these are the suggestions. This includes the same that younger than 8 to 24 months less than 1 hour, 2 to 5 years, 1 hour is okay. And say after 6 years, it is the quality which is much important and not the quantity. Managing your child's use of screen and media will be an ongoing challenge, but you have to do it for their betterment. Promote good eye health in a young population is a need of the hour. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Rutika. It was wonderful. That is the topic of the hot topic. I mean, because the screen time has gone up, especially with the pandemic in, not many people who never used to look at computers or the mobile are into it. So that's really letting us know more about this screen time and other disasters of the excessive computer usage. Thank you so much. May I ask Dr. Nitin Upadhyay to introduce the next speaker?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Gopal. I invite Dr. Praveen Kher, who will talk on virtual versus physical teaching, his own experience. In this pandemic, most of the teaching was virtual. So his talk will be beneficial for us. Please, Dr. Praveen Kher.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Praveena Kher instead of Praveen Kher. So, I am really thankful to MOS for giving me opportunity to speak on a subject that is physical versus virtual teaching. I am being a professor in a medical college, being more in teaching. That's why maybe that I need to have this particular problems with my students. That is very important. So let us go for the what exactly is being seen in the epidemic. So the pandemic. So according to Yuvan, let us talk something about the corona. According to Yuvan, in 2020, a novel coronavirus known as COVID-19 was discovered in the last month of year 2019 in a seafood market in Yuan. So in 2019, this particular this was being seen, and because it has been transmission was very fast. That's why the Director General of WHO in 2020 declared it as a pandemic, and that's why the social distancing was being was to be announced, and that's why we have to go for different types of changes in our daily life. So COVID has a rapid affection in day-to-day practice. So many things have been affected. Our whole life was affected. Mainly the healthcare services and the educational institute were mainly we are concerned with. That's why I am going to talk about the educational and the healthcare services, the challenges in the diagnosis, quarantine, and the treatment of suspected or confirmed cases was very important. There was high burden for functioning of existing medical system. Patients with other diseases and health problems were getting neglected. There was overload on the doctors and other healthcare professionals who are at a very high risk. So requirement for high protection was also there. So when we acted, we were to use mask, we were to have a distance, that is a separation, distance must have been, was being taken care of, and also we were avoiding crowd. The healthcare workers, that is medical staff, had to go for PPE kits and all protection, where the health workers, they had also have to have the protection. Even the general public had to go for mask. So this was about what exactly they were to use because of the pandemic. The situation challenged the educational system across the world. So it is that we have to know about what happened in our educational field. We were forced to shift to online mode of teaching overnight. Training had to quickly evolve to continue providing high educational standards for the residents and fellows, not only the undergraduate students, but also to the residents who are working in the Department of Ophthalmology. They had also had a lot of problems. So Educational Institute, which were initially face-to-face lectures, they went on to the online learning, and that is to use of internet and some other important technologies which has to be developed for the educational purposes. Instructional delivery and management of the program was to be there. There was two type of online learning, asynchronous and synchronous. There were two types of learning that was being so we saw a type of picture. Can you hear me? Can you see me? So as we are doing now here as online working, that happened. All the regular classrooms were changed into Zoom classrooms, or what we call it as a virtual classroom. All the academics was to be changed, that all students will have access to a high quality education, no matter where they live, and educators were being treated so that they become very opt for their online teaching. So what are the advantages of online teaching? Access to many sources of information and knowledge. We no need to leave your home because you can have our online teaching. Then lot of traveling time was being saved, lot of expenditure was being saved. The flexibility of time and place because of recorded session, that was there, and update of easy to update ourselves online in our regular consultation. The online consultation reduced the time. The disadvantages was the human touch was missing, that is isolation was there, difficult to focus on screen for a longer time. The concept and the principles are easier to understand in person, so they were not being properly taken up by the gray matter. Access to teacher is less, can't ask question directly. Eye problems are more. Many physical diseases like neck problem, back problem, fatigue had increased. Long time sitting increases the obesity. Psychological issues were there because of the lack of human warmth. No way to know whether student is attentive or not because we are taking online classes. A protocol of patients attending the clinics has changed abruptly because of the online. So few of the observation which we did in our institute, and that the total number of students were 200. We saw for the attendance physically, and we also saw for the results of one of the examinations that was being compared. We also, so to summarize, there was equal attendance amongst the batches attending virtual classes and physical classes. The results showed that the higher marks for the students in the physical category was 81.5%. That is, from the 200 students, 161% had better result as compared to the virtual category, where there was 39 students which score higher marks. So physical mode is better than the virtual mode. To add up here something that, but more than 90% marks, the students were more in virtual group as compared to the physical group. That means the student which were regularly and attentively attending the classes were being benefited, and they got more marks as compared to the physical teaching. Then we also did some of the surveys regarding the different types of distribution of their distribution of their symptoms, and we also saw that what are the different symptoms they had. So to see for the summary, 180 students responded to our questions, which were being given a questionnaire. Mean age of the ages of the student was 19.20 years. The maximum were 21 to 22 years age group. Mean duration of digital devices used during the COVID era was 5.5 plus minus 1.2 hours, which is more than pre-COVID era, which was 1.9. That is 1.5 hours was less. The most common digital devices were the smartphones, and nearly 168 students out of 200, they attended more than 5 hours per day. So to summarize the disorders, the mild one were 41.1, that is sometimes they had a problem. 14.4, that is moderate, often they had a problem. And 19 student, that is 10.5%, has severe, that is daily they had this problem. And nearly 33.8% had no complaints. So this was the summary regarding the disorders. Some of the disorders already in child age group they have mentioned, but here we are amongst the student that we see that no complaints was there in 33%, itching was there in 37%, headache was the most important complaint, it was 52%, burning sensation was 34.4%, eye fatigue was 16.1%, and blurring of vision was about 10%. So few recommendations regarding the teaching, that's the essential element. We have to develop a system for teaching, assessing the curriculum and the technology. Trained human resources should be available. Assessing the family, that is assessing the environment where they are being taught, or the family background where they are sitting and studying, and the keynotes are the provision of strategies, assignment projects, and packages or the packets to students should be given. General education material with internet supply should be given. Material directly from the special educator and the related service provider should be there, considering making choices available to the students. Now, to ensure the quality of ophthalmic specialist training during the pandemic, following can be done. Intensify surgical skill training from the first year of residence. It's very, very important. Introducing virtual surgical simulators like cataract surgery simulators to all ophthalmic departments to develop practical skill amongst the trainees. Providing additional surgical training for the residents who were posted in COVID-19 unit during the pandemic. Introducing and improving virtual forms of teaching on a large scale, including wet labs, virtual simulators, webinars, podcasts, online courses, and symposia. Our institute, JNMC Savangi Meghe, has well-equipped virtual lab for budding ophthalmologists. We welcome you all. Thank you all for the patient hearing, and I thank Dr. Gopal Arora and all the dignitaries for giving me additional time if there had been. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, ma'am. That was interesting talk. I think we can have one of the students also in the panelists again. He can tell you how to ditch teachers in their virtual classes. Well, thank you so much. Now, the next topic we have is, I don't know what headache falls into, whether it's a neurologist, a physician, an anesthetist, or a headache specialist, which has a new entity come up. So to tell us more about this, Dr. Praveen Doadupare is going to tell us about what's the general ophthalmologist approaches to headache evaluation. Dr. Praveen, if I pronounced it right, not Praveena.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
That's why my confusion went there. Okay. Okay. Madam, you have to stop sharing your screen.
Yes, yes.
I request the speakers to please click on time.
Yes, before proceeding further, I request all the speakers to please stick with the time because we are already running late by 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Dr. Praveen Dhuadapare from Gondia. At the onset, I would like to thank Scientific Committee, MOS, and office bearers for giving me this opportunity. I am going to talk on general ophthalmologist approach in a headache evaluation case. This is important because whenever patient come to our OPD, they come with expectation that spectacle will cure their headache. Many a times physicians are referring us patient with headache to rule out refractive error and papilloedema. But is really our role limited to that? Means, are we the refractionist in while evaluating case of headache? No, we are not just refractionist or optometrist. We are at first physician, and physician's role starts from the very basics of history taking. What is patient's age? What is patient's occupation? All those basics should be retrieved while taking the history. And what one usually misses details of which type of headache it is, whether that is frontal or occipital, unilateral or bilateral, any associated aura-like symptoms in a unilateral case. But remember, not all unilateral headaches are migraine, because sometimes aura get confused with the general photophobia, and such a unilateral headache with photophobia can sometimes be in a case of acute angle closure suspect or acute angle closure glaucoma, low grade anterior uveitis also. And those we have a few times observed that those get confused with the migraine cases. Diurnal variation is also to be observed, and at the increase in headache in early morning, especially associated with convulsion, projectile vomiting, can be due to CNS causes. Evening time headache, especially the frontal one, can be due to the ophthalmic cause. The aggravated symptom after prolonged reading or electronic gadget use, this history is to be retrieved, because the professional need for this prolonged activity or just a leisure activity, counseling part in management will differ. Associated symptoms must be asked for, because we have observed simply changing dietary habit and avoiding hypoglycemia just before afternoon lunch time, increased acidity, hypotension, or excessive fatigue in young adults is associated with the headache, which so more common in the afternoon hours of their job, and they consider it as a because of refractive error. Even some of us consider it. So this history must be attended very carefully. Postural headache or neck pain in IT workers, which is actually the occipital or neck pain, occipital headache or neck pain, should be treated with consultation with occupational therapist or physiotherapist rather than physician's help. Recent onset fever, URI, sinusitis, etc. All those should be inquired. Irregular treatment of hypertension, diabetes, any other systemic diseases like severe anemia can be the one of the cause of hypertension. Nowadays, this is more commonly seen is stress, anxiety, hypertension is being observed, and which is more common cause of one of the common cause of headache. Type A personality of patient or their family members, not by questionnaire but by the body language we can observe, is also one of the cause of headache, and all this should be observed before starting treating the patient. Yes, refraction forms the basic of ophthalmologist view part in evaluating this case, and all uncorrected refractive errors, especially with close attention to their working distance for their particular occupation, should be treated properly. Hypermetropia should be fully corrected, and fewer times we have observed that rather than fully correcting myopia, especially in those people who are having prolonged near activity, if we undercorrect myopia, that do help, and we may counsel patient that your distance vision is going to be compromised slightly, but your comfort level is going to be good. While dispensing IPD, especially in a patient with high astigmatism and high power lenses, should be noted down on paper. That will help optician. Binocular balancing and comfort should be seen before dispensing the prescription. Fogging and cycloplegic refraction with postmediatic test may be done in a young patient or children, and also whenever accommodation factor is suspected. Not only refraction is important, but especially for the patient whose prolonged duration of work is in outdoors field workers, simply plain powered sunglasses of a good quality will help to reduce the episodes of headache. Now this category we have customized. Whenever basic refraction is done and if nothing is found, we try to segregate patient into red eye and non-red eye group. Red eye patient will usually have some organic pathology like uveitis or angle closure or some corneal pathology. Non-red eye patient, apart from refractive error, may have squint, foliage, convergence deficiency, meibomian gland disease, or open angle glaucoma, and sometimes secondary glaucoma like pseudoexfoliation glaucoma. So this categorization in mind, we need to do the basic eye alignment testing, which special view to fusional efforts put by the patient. Conversion testing must be done in all late teenagers and recent young workers who have started their office job newly, because a prolonged duration of near work, which they were not accustomed to, convergence deficiency may cause the headache in them. Yes, slit lamp examination is a part and parcel. We need to observe all meibomian gland disease, cornea, anterior chamber. You'll see for uveitis. Pupillary examination may give clue to optic neuritis, optic atrophy, AION sort of thing. Fundus examination for disc edema and glaucoma suspect, we all know sometimes, but fundus examination may also give clue to vasculitis or AION sort of things. So if not dilated examination is possible in all patients, but central fundus examination must be done in all patients. IOP testing is nowadays recommended for all, but that must be done in all patients above 50 years of age, those with family history or with this suspect. NCT is nowadays preferred as it is contact lens, but applanation tonometry is a gold standard and must in all higher suspicion cases. Pachymetry corrected IOP should be considered. Done with the basic things. Sometimes, as we thought, simply the testing blood pressure or blood sugar level and hemoglobin level may do good in such patient, and we need to go beyond ophthalmology slightly, the basic job of physician which we can do. Special investigation like CT, MRI, MRA may be done in consultation with the physician. We need to go have a multidisciplinary approach while treating such patient, and we may not sometimes do all the job ourselves. So other faculties must be maybe sometime need to be involved. Placebo therapy, though not routinely recommended, but if patient is doing multiple hospital shopping, in that case we rarely do prescribe the spectacle as a placebo therapy, and while prescribing we particularly advise the catchy names like ARC, the particular lubricating eye drop, which actually work as a placebo therapy and do good for the patient, ultimately good for us. To summarize, we need to do all the things in a sequence. Just go to the basics, do the customized things, and that will help us to treat the patient of headache better. So take home message from my presentation is, think beyond refraction, that will help to decrease the headache of patient as well as decrease our headache. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Praveen. May I request Dr. Kenya to invite the next speaker?
Next speaker is Dr. Ganesh Bamre, and he's going to speak on ultrasound in ophthalmology. So I invite the doctor to share his screen.
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Gopal Bhaiya, Vaishal.
Hello, ma'am. How are you?
Hi, I'm very good. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the speakers also. Thank you,
Hopefully
Siddharth.
we'll be in time, ma'am.
Pardon, sir?
Hopefully we'll run in time, sir.
Yes. No, sir. Don't worry. You'll be good. You'll be fine.
Yeah.
Participant.
You are there, no chinta.
Sir, other
Can
participants.
Dr. Praveen stop sharing the screen?
Stop it. So
Yeah, Dr. Praveen, please stop sharing the screen, please.
Yes, sir. Doing it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Ganesh, we can see your
Yes,
screen.
sir. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my topic is ultrasound in ophthalmology.
Please share your screen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now we can see your screen. Yeah, go ahead.
What basically ultrasound is? The ultrasound is the acoustic wave of oscillating particle in the medium, and which generate the frequency
Ganesh,
of
make it a full screen.
full. Yes. It's okay, sir.
Yes, now it's okay. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So it makes the frequency of around 20 kilohertz, which is beyond the human audible limit. It's equivalent to the ultrasonic cleaning machine which we use in OT. Similarly, the ultrasound is getting created. This is a brief history of ultrasound. So the ophthalmic ultrasonography is electric pulse is applied to the piezoelectric crystal, which in turn generate the short pulse of longitudinal type. So this is a probe of the B-scan machine. The electric pulse is generated, which initiate the electric impulse, and the piezoelectric crystal then make a oscillating wave. So this is how the oscillating wave go hit the ocular surface, and the coming back waves is getting captured by the transducer and to make the B-scan. So there is presence of a dampening material which is present at the tip of the B-scan machine, made up of plastic or epoxy, which convert the long pulse into the short pulse, which helps in axial resolution of the ultrasound system. So this is a B-scan report of a particular patient. There is patient name, ID, basic data. The gain is mentioned. So there is associated A-scan machine, A-scan wave you can see at the down phase. So the A-scan generally calculate the length of the eyeball by formula distance is equal to velocity into the time. So these are some physical properties of the ultrasound. The velocity can differ in different media. It's around 1532 in aqueous and vitreous. So as the frequency of the machine increases, like A-scan, the frequency is 8 megahertz, the penetration is 23.5. UBM, the frequency is 20.50, but the penetration is less. So greater the penetration, lesser is the resolution, and lesser the penetration, more is the resolution. So in ophthalmology, we generally use 10 megahertz probe. Then reflectivity is higher if there is a difference between the two media is stronger. That is, density is different between two media is greater. The reflectivity or echoes. So this is a B-scan machine which consists of pulsar, probe called as transducer, receiver, and display machine. So pulsar generally produce pulses at a rate of 1000 pulses per second. So this is a B-scan probe. On top of that B-scan probe, there is a B-scan marker which help to locate which area you are assessing. So emitted sound beam are two types: non-focused and focused. Non-focused beam which we use in A-scan machine, and focused beam which we use in B-scan. B-scan is a short form of brightness scan. So main important part is a gain. So when the gain is higher, you can see the weaker signal can be transmitted, and you can see the vitreous opacity. And when the gain is high, the weaker signal is cancelled, and only high echoing particles like foreign body will give the echoes on the B-scan machine. So acoustic impedance, another property. The greater the difference between two media, greater is the acoustic impedance. So the stronger wave is created by a brighter dot. Like in retinal detachment, we see a brighter dot, like thick membrane we can see. But in case of a PVD, we can see a lower or medium to low echoes. So returning waves or returning echoes are affected by various factors like angle, interface, size, shape, absorption, scattering, and reflection of the particular pathological area like retinal detachment or melanoma. So this is the some details. So probe position can be of three types: transfer, longitudinal, axial probe position. This is a transfer probe position. This is longitudinal. This is axial probe position. So the accuracy of ophthalmic ultrasound is higher if we do ultrasound along with the associated A-scan. The accuracy is around 95%. So use of ultrasound, first we will see the ultrasound by microscopy. We put a cup on the eye, put a saline, and do ultrasound UVM scan. So it is having high resolution. It can give clear idea of the anterior segment. So this is the case of iris Bombay. You can see cornea, ankle, and the Bombay formation. So this is the case of anterior staphyloma. You can classically see a staphylomatous and outpouching of the cornea and anterior surface. This is the case of a cyclodialysis case. This is the case of iris Bombay, where you can see the elevation of the iris and total closure of the angle. This is a case of a iris tumor. This is a case of a supraciliary effusion. Here you can see a cystic spaces at the supraciliary area. This is a case of a tendencies. This is a sclera, and just above that there is a cystic spaces, tendencies. Now we'll see some dynamic, normally seen B-scan images. So this is a case of astrohalosis where you see low to moderate refractive echoes occupying the whole vitreous cavity, and you can see the area of translucency behind it. This is another case where you see a retinal detachment with associated choroidal detachment. You can see a double membrane, a dome-shaped choroidal detachment you can see with serous fluid behind it. This is a case of a choroidal melanoma where you can see classical collar stud appearance when the choroidal melanoma breaks the Bruch membrane, and you can see excavation of the choroidal layers also. Now this is a case of a complete PVD where you can see a good after movement. The dot-like and membranous echoes are not attached to the disc, which is a differentiating feature between the RD and PVD. So this is a double membrane where you can see vitreous which is organized and along with retinal detachment. So this is a case of early retinal detachment where only inferior part of the membranous echoes can be seen. The good after movement of vitreous also can be seen. This is a case of exudative retinal detachment where you see the exudative retinal detachment changing its shape, and you can see dot-like echoes behind that serous detachment, and you also see the T signs in this thickened sclera. So this is a case of a fresh vitreous image where you see a low to moderate reflective multiple dot-like echoes in the vitreous cavity. This is a case of an intraocular foreign body where you reduce the gain of the B-scan machine, and you can see a classical after shadow just beyond the intraocular foreign body. This is a case of a shallow retinal detachment where you see the shallow line of subretinal fluid in the retinal detachment. This is a case of a choroidal detachment where you see a classical dome-shaped elevation at the upper and lower quadrant. And if you do associated A scan, you can see a double hump pattern on the A scan. This is an organized vitreous image where in the diabetic retinopathy where you see a double membrane and few membranes are present, and the convexity of the membrane is concave. So it's a tractional retinal detachment. So this is a case of a PVD which is attached to the disc. You can see good after movement, but a point attachment at the disc. This is a PVD with a vitreous image. This is a case of a kissing choroidal where the two choroidals are touching to each other. This is a case of suprachoroidal hemorrhage where you see the subretinal dot-like echoes of moderate to high reflectivity suggestive of hemorrhagic choroidal. This is the organized vitreous image. This is a case of vitreous floaters. This is the case of vitritis where you can see a dot-like echoes occupying all the vitreous cavity, and you can see increased retinochoroidal thickness and optic nerve head shadow. This is the case of a choroidal hemangioma. This is a case of optic disc coloboma where you can see the outpouching at the disc level. This is the case of a coat disease. Then there is a retinopathy of prematurity, short eye length, closed funnel retinal detachment. This is the T sign which you see in panophthalmitis where the retinochoroidal thickness is increased, and this is the optic nerve shadow. So it's look like a T, so it's called as T sign. This is a posterior staphyloma showing posterior outpouching of the sclera. And there is 30-degree test which is done in case of a true papilloedema. So there are various orbital indications like orbital mass, extraorbital muscle elevation, globe elevation, optic nerve head to scene, orbital inflammation, orbital foreign body. This is a case of thyroid ophthalmoplegia where the muscle thickness is increased, and when the muscle thickness is more than total muscle thickness is more than 18 to 20, you consider as a thyroid ophthalmoplegia. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ganesh.
Yes.
It was a wonderful talk. May I request Dr. Nitin Upadhyay to invite the next speaker?
Yeah, thank you, Gopal. I invite Dr. Nilesh Jain to speak on the traumatic luxation of globe, unusual case, a complete recovery. Dr. Ganesh,
yes,
can
sir,
you...
yes, sir, yes. I'm just doing it.
Dr. Nilesh, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, sir.
Okay, no problem.
I think still the
Yeah.
Dr. Ganesh, will you please stop sharing? I'm not able to share the screen.
Good afternoon, Dr. Nilesh sir. I think Dr. Ganesh will have to stop sharing for you to be able to share. Hello, Nilesh bhai.
Namaste, ma'am. How are you, ma'am?
I'm very good, sir. Thank you. And great to have you all here. Dr.
you so
Ganesh, ji, can you please stop sharing?
Think he has some connectivity issues.
Yeah.
Can the admin do the so needful?
Yes, Sai people, please.
Sai Dada, Manjula Didi.
So before starting my presentation, I would like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Ragini Parekh ma'am, Dr. Parikshit Gogate sir, Dr. Sirish Swaraj sir, Dr. Swapnesh, Dr. Pankaj, and all the chairperson today. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity. And my topic is a traumatic luxation of the globe, and that too with the full recovery. Just a minute. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, it's not moving. Yeah, this is a case of a 10-year-old girl came to our casualty with a history of injury to the right eye with a brake lever of bicycle due to fall 3 hours ago. Pain, swelling, and unable to close the right eye was the chief complaint of the patient since the time of injury. Clinical examination revealed a lacerated wound just below the eyebrow, about 1 centimeter approximately, and fat prolapse and the ooze of blood was coming out from there. Eye examination revealed a luxation of globe up to the posterior part, patchy subconjunctival hemorrhage, and with congestion of conjunctiva, cornea was clear, antechamber was quiet, pupil of normal size, but not reacting to direct light, but sluggishly reacting to the consensual light reflex. The vision in the right eye was hand movement, and in the left eye was 6/6. The left eye finding was absolutely normal. Hence, the diagnosis of globe luxation was made, and relocation of globe was planned immediately under guarded visual prophylaxis to prevent the ischemia to the other ocular tissues. By the help of two simple instruments, Descemet's lead retractor and blunt end of the lacrimal bone dissector under topical anesthesia. My screen is not moving. Yeah. So I'll show you the video here, how we are doing this. Are you able to see my video, please, ma'am?
Ashwini?
We are able to see.
Yes.
Yes.
So this is a video. In this, we are using here the trick is to get the lid margins which rolled in, and once get hold of it, pass the tip of the retractor under lid margin and globe and push up the lid margin with one hand, and with the help of the index finger of the other hand, push the globe down and in simultaneously. I don't know why it is not moving. So this is the first day picture after doing the reposition of the globe. The fundus was normal, little bit lid edema is there, and extraocular movement shows marked improvement, and vision is improved up to 624. And this is the day 7 picture. Here you can see the stapler wound there, and it is healed up. and eyes was absolutely normal. Vision is 6 globe was normal, and extraocular movements was also normal. So on first postoperative day, we did the CT scan orbit as well as brain, that was normal. And the discussion part is the luxation of globe. It can be classified as spontaneous, voluntary, or traumatic. Spontaneous luxation occurs without any conscious effort, with or without a precipitating factor. The precipitating factor can be just a lead manipulation or disease process, such as extreme lead retraction in case of thyroid ophthalmopathy, or in conditions such as floppy eyelid syndrome and Crouzon's disease, where the orbit is very shallow. Voluntary luxation is the ability to produce one's globe at will, most often just by lead manipulation without any precipitating trigger. Traumatic luxation, as you've seen in my case, it can also be categorized based on the clinical features like avulsio incompleta and avulsio completa. In avulsio incompleta, where the injury to the optic nerve will be there, but other structures will be normal. But in avulsio completa, where the structures, all the structures will involve, especially extraocular muscles as well as the optic nerve. The clinical features can be vary from exposure keratopathy and corneal abrasion, blepharospasm, traumatic optic neuropathy, optic nerve avulsion leading to complete visual loss, and phthisis bulbi. And extracranial complications like meningitis, intracranial hemorrhages, CSF leak have also been reported. Brain and orbital CT scans are required to exclude fractures, intracranial bleeding, and optic chiasmal injury. So, based on the review of literature, trauma seems to be the most common etiology for the luxation of globe. Trauma, however, can be accidental or inflicted, as in the brutal sport. The eyelid in their position play a crucial role in preventing the dislocation of the globe anteriorly. The mechanism, however, in a brake handle injury has been attributed to the relatively obtuse structure of the eyelids. So when the brake handle strikes the upper orbit, the intraorbital pressure may increase while the eyelid is pushed back. This further pushes the orbital content anteriorly, using the orbital apex as a fulcrum. This process may result in the luxation of globe. Pre-existing weakness of extraocular muscles and its ligament have also been proposed as an etiology of the globe luxation. The optic nerve damage is due to the extreme forward rotation of the globe, which causes shearing of the optic nerve and damage to its fiber, which most commonly occurs at lamina cribrosa, where there is a lack of myelin sheath and supportive tissue, making it more susceptible to damage. The extraocular muscle involvement usually seen in globe luxation associated with maxillofacial injuries in leaf-foot fracture. The most susceptible muscles to be injured is medial rectus, followed by inferior rectus and superior rectus. The oblique muscles are the last ones to be injured. Then prevention. The prevention of further episodes begin with educating the patients. And patients with an underlying disease such as thyroid orbitopathy should seek treatment of their disease, and they should be instructed on the proper repositioning technique. Surgical options include lateral torsorrhaphy, lead retraction repair, and underlying diseases like great or space-occupying orbital lesions causing autoproptosis should be identified before considering surgical intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nilesh. That was a wonderful case presentation. I hand over to Dr. Siddharth Kamble.
Yes, thank you, sir. Really, it is a very excellent presentation by Dr. Nilesh.
Thank you, sir.
And all the speakers. So, so any questions from chairman and co-chairmen? Or I have a few questions from audience. One question for Dr. Ganesh. Dr. Ganesh, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Ganesh, in the patient of LIG, where in phacomarpic or phacolytic glaucoma, where we couldn't see the optic disc. So
Yes,
in B-scan, whether we can know the exact cupping of the optic disc before going for surgery, where you have shown nice videos showing the papilledema also in B-scan.
Yes, sir.
So by changing any resolution, whether we can know how much cupping the patient has.
Yes, sir, definitely. Sir, if the intraocular pressure is very high and it's like 50 to 60 millimeter of mercury for at least 1 to 2 days, then only the anatomical changes or physiologic, the anatomical changes will be seen on the B scan. So if in the B scan, when you zoom it to the optic disc level, you can clearly see the disc cupping. But if the disc cupping is since only 1 to 2 days, it may not have anatomical changes of cupping. So if it is a long-standing LIG of more than 5 to 6 days, then only you can pick it up on the B scan machine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And another question is for Dr. Pravina Kher, ma'am. Ma'am, you have done nice study. Are you there, Dr. Pravina, madam?
Yes, yes, I'm there.
Yes, you have done nice study. I just wanted to ask you, the students you collected from your study, whether they were normal students or medical students?
Medical student. I have done in my institute only, and 2 batches. One batch which had a physical classes, and the next batch was with virtual classes. They were the medical students. They were studying.
So have you started your physical teaching now?
We have started already. We have started.
You have started.
We have already started physical classes.
Okay. And well, Dr. Rutika.
Siddharth,
Yes,
we
yes,
may have to give away
Yes,
the
sir.
hall. So you can finish
yes.
your questions and then we can.
Yes, ma'am. There are no any.
You can ask the question.
Yes, Dr. Rutika, can she elaborate about more about lens flipper, that is to decrease the asthenopic symptoms in child?
Yes,
You were
sir.
talking
Basically,
about
they are used in varying powers, sir. Ranging from plus and minus. They are the 4 lenses. 2 are grouped together. One has a minus power and the other side has a plus power. We have to use it alternately. And the patient basically for convergence, insufficiency and infacility. Mainly for infacility, it is very useful, sir. We have to use the card. Different cards are there. Even heart chart can be used for the same. Hello?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, thank you. So these are the questions from my side, ma'am. If you,
I think I take this opportunity to thank all the speakers along with Dr. Kenya, Dr. Upadhyay, and Dr. Kamble, and of course our chairperson scientific committee, Dr. Ragini, for allowing us to conduct this session. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, Gopal Bhaiya. You are a stalwart. You have been the president and scientific person of this MOS. You are a brother, and thank you for conducting this session so well. And thank you, everybody. Pravina Kher ma'am, Siddharth, Vaishal, Nitin Upadhyay, Rutika, Nilesh Bhai, and everybody, Ganesh, Mamre, and everybody for this, Praveen, everybody for this wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Have finished the fastest amongst the other 3 sessions, and the other 3 halls are running. Gopal Bhaiya rocks.
Thank you.